It was a moment that no one could have ever predicted. On a quiet, ordinary day, in a small, bustling hospital, two innocent newborns were placed into the world. The room was filled with the usual sounds, the quiet murmur of the nurses, the beeping of machines, the occasional cry of a newborn. But there was nothing ordinary about these twins. They were about to become a part of a story that would leave the world in shock. The babies were born under circumstances that most people could never have imagined. The mother, a woman whose identity was known only to the hospital staff, gave birth to two healthy, beautiful black twins. They had soft, curly hair, smooth, dark skin, and their tiny bodies were perfectly formed. However, there was a twist to their story even before they entered the world, a twist that would set the course for their lives in a direction no one saw coming. The parents, white by descent, had made a decision that seemed incomprehensible to everyone around them. Just hours after the twins were born, they'd vanished from the hospital, leaving behind their newborn children. No note, no explanation, just an empty room, with two helpless babies in their cribs. The nurses, upon realizing what had happened, were frozen in disbelief. How could parents simply walk away from their own flesh and blood? The twins, who had no understanding of the world around them, lay in their cribs, unaware of the pain and betrayal they would endure. The doctors and hospital staff had no choice but to follow protocol. A social worker was immediately called in, and the twins were taken into temporary care, their future uncertain. The abandonment left everyone shaken. What could possibly drive parents to leave their newborn children like this? Was it fear, ignorance, or something far darker that led them to make such a heart-wrenching decision? The mystery surrounding the twins' abandonment began to take root, setting the stage for a story that would take decades to unfold. Days turned into weeks, and the twins were moved to foster care. They were separated from one another, placed in different homes, each facing a different future. The hospital staff, although deeply affected by the situation, had to move on with their jobs, but the question of why lingered in everyone's minds. Why had their parents abandoned them? Was it because they couldn't handle raising children of a different race? Or were there deeper, darker secrets that no one could understand? The decision of the white parents to abandon their black twins wasn't just an act of neglect, it was an act of complete rejection. There were whispers in the hospital hallways, with some wondering if race played a role in their abandonment. Would things have been different if the twins had been white? Was the sight of two black children too much for the parents to bear? These questions echoed through the minds of those who had witnessed the twins' birth, but the answers remained elusive, shrouded in silence. Meanwhile, the twins were left to grow up in foster homes. Their first few months were filled with uncertainty. The initial care they received was warm, but there was always an underlying feeling of sadness and loss. Both babies were too young to comprehend the magnitude of their situation, but as they grew older, the reality of their abandonment began to weigh heavily on their hearts. They had no memories of their biological parents, no understanding of why they had been left behind. They had only one another in the beginning, but soon they were separated. As they grew older, they began asking questions. The sense of loss was not something that could be easily ignored. They asked social workers, foster parents, and anyone who might have answers. But the answers were few and far between. They were told what little information there was, that their parents had simply disappeared, leaving them to grow up without the love and care they deserved. Yet, despite the pain, there was a flicker of hope that burned inside each of them. Though they were separated, their bond was unbreakable. Deep down, both twins knew they were connected by something far greater than their physical abandonment. The emotional weight of not knowing who they were or why they were abandoned was heavy on their shoulders, but it didn't stop them from surviving. The decision made by their parents, a decision that would forever define their lives, was unthinkable to anyone who heard their story. Yet it was the reality the twins had to face. In their hearts, they longed for answers. Why had their parents chosen to leave them? Why had they made such an unimaginable decision? Their quest for answers would lead them on an incredible journey that would change their lives in ways no one could predict. As the twins grew older, they began to understand that they would have to take matters into their own hands. They had been abandoned by the two people who should have loved them the most, but they would not be defined by that. They would search for their identity, seek the truth, and find the answers that would give them peace. This was just the beginning of a journey that would not only answer the questions they had about their past, but would also lead to a reunion that no one saw coming. The story of these twins, abandoned at birth, would unfold in ways that were unimaginable. But it all started with that fateful, unthinkable decision made by their parents on that quiet, ordinary day. The twins, though born of the same flesh, were destined to grow up in two entirely different worlds. Their parents' decision to abandon them had set the course for their lives to diverge, and as the years passed, the stark contrast between their childhoods became more and more apparent. Though they were connected by blood, their experiences were shaped by the environments in which they were raised, and the lack of a shared past left them with an unspoken bond that neither could fully understand. One twin, whom we'll call Elijah, was placed with a loving middle-class family. His foster parents, Sarah and Michael, had always dreamed of adopting a child. They had never been able to have children of their own, so when they were given the opportunity to adopt Elijah, they were overjoyed. Elijah grew up in a home filled with love, laughter, and security. Sarah and Michael treated him as their own son, never making him feel like he was different from other children. They provided him with the best education, the opportunity to play sports, and a sense of belonging in a world that had once rejected him. But despite all the love he received, there was an emptiness in Elijah's heart. As he grew older, he began to notice the differences between himself and his parents. They were white, and he was black. He often felt like an outsider in a world where people like him were rare. There were times when other children would stare at him or make insensitive remarks, and he would retreat into himself, trying to understand why he didn't look like everyone else. Yet, Sarah and Michael worked hard to help him embrace his identity. They made sure he was proud of who he was, teaching him about his heritage and the importance of self-love. But no matter how hard they tried, there was one question Elijah couldn't shake off. Where did I come from? Who are my real parents? The emptiness would gnaw at him during his teenage years, and he would lie awake at night, wondering about the family he had never known. There were moments of deep sorrow when he felt disconnected from the world around him. His loving parents had given him everything he could have asked for, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was missing. On the other side of the world, the twin sister, whom we'll call Amira, faced an entirely different reality. After being abandoned, Amara was placed in a foster home in a different part of the country, far away from Elijah. Her early years were marked by neglect, and unlike her brother, she didn't grow up in a home filled with love. Amara's foster parents were distant and uninvolved, and her childhood was filled with isolation. Unlike Elijah, she didn't have the same opportunities for a better life. She attended a public school where resources were limited, and the constant feeling of being overlooked and forgotten became part of her everyday life. As a child, Amara was often left to her own devices. There were no family dinners around the table, no bedtime stories, no hugs to comfort her when she was scared. Her days were spent in solitude, and she learned quickly that no one would come to save her. The emotional neglect left scars that would last a lifetime. Yet, despite everything, Amara was resilient. She developed a fierce independence, learning to survive on her own. She spent her days reading, dreaming of a life outside her small, unremarkable foster home. But as the years went by, the question that haunted her grew louder and louder. Why did they leave me? What did I do wrong? Amara's yearning to know the truth was constant. While Elijah had the comfort of a loving family, Amara's survival was a quiet rebellion against the world that had rejected her. She wondered if she had been abandoned because of the color of her skin. She couldn't understand why her parents didn't want her. Her life was shaped by the longing for answers, and yet She had no one to turn to. The only thing she knew for sure was that she was different from everyone around her, different in a way that made her feel invisible, unimportant, and unwanted. In their separate worlds, the twins lived with a silent, shared pain. Neither knew that the other existed. But the emotional toll of their abandonment was something they both carried with them, though in different ways. Elijah struggled with the feeling of not fully belonging, while Amara fought daily to feel seen, to feel like she mattered. Though their experiences were different, the bond they shared was something neither could explain. There was always a sense of something missing, something deeper than they could ever put into words. As the years went by, both Elijah and Amara grew older, their lives continuing on separate paths. Elijah thrived in a supportive environment, but found that love alone couldn't fill the hole in his heart. He started looking for clues about his biological parents, digging through adoption records and trying to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Amara, who had endured years of hardship, found solace in her ability to survive. She fought for her future, not knowing that her twin brother was doing the same thing, searching for the same answers. Neither twin knew it, but the search for their true identities would soon bring them closer than ever. The worlds they had grown up in, one filled with love, the other with neglect, would eventually collide. And when they discovered the truth, they would realize that they were connected not only by blood, but by a shared journey of survival, longing, and an unbreakable bond that time could never erase. In the midst of their separate struggles, the seeds of a future reunion had already been planted. The twins' paths would soon cross, and the journey of their incredible story was far from over. What had begun with abandonment and pain would soon give way to something even more profound. A reunion that would change everything. As the years passed, both Elijah and Amara grew increasingly restless with the unanswered questions that haunted them about their past. Each twin, in their own way, began to feel the gnawing sense that their story was incomplete. The emptiness they had carried for so long, this deep, unspoken void, began to transform into an insatiable thirst for the truth. It wasn't just about who their parents were anymore. It was about discovering who they truly were and understanding the choices that had shaped their lives. The search for their origins had become not only an emotional quest, but a personal one, a journey that would take them to places they never imagined. For Elijah, the quest began quietly. It started with small steps, questions to his adoptive parents, searching for adoption records, reading anything that might offer a clue. Sarah and Michael, his loving parents, had always been supportive, but as Elijah grew older, he began to realize how little they knew about his biological family. Their love for him was unconditional, but he felt a growing distance between the life they had given him and the life he was meant to lead. There was a longing within him that they couldn't fill, and though they reassured him that he was loved, Elijah needed more. He needed to understand why his biological parents had abandoned him. What had gone wrong? At first, his efforts to find out more about his birth family were slow. The adoption agency had very little information to offer, and much of the documentation was sparse. But Elijah was persistent. He started visiting public records offices, digging through old documents, and reaching out to anyone who might have known his parents at the time of his birth. It was a lonely road, and there were moments of discouragement. But Elijah refused to give up. The more he searched, the more pieces of his past began to fall into place. Through his research, Elijah discovered that his biological parents had lived in a small town nearby, a place he had never visited. There was no trace of them now, and the trail seemed to go cold. But Elijah didn't let that stop him. He sent letters to local authorities, hoping for any clue, anything that could point him in the right direction. He even reached out to the few people who might have known his parents before their disappearance, asking questions, hoping for an answer. All he had were fragments of stories, rumors about a troubled relationship, whispers of an inability to cope with the responsibilities of parenting, but nothing concrete. And yet, Elijah kept pushing forward, driven by the hope that one day the truth would be revealed. Meanwhile, Amara's journey toward the truth was not so methodical. She had always been more impulsive, more driven by her emotions than logic. Her childhood of neglect had hardened her, but it also gave her the strength to fight for what she wanted. After years of surviving on her own, Amara found herself yearning for something more. There was a point in her late teens when she realized she could no longer avoid the truth. She had to know why her parents had left her. Why had she been abandoned in a world that seemed to offer so little for someone like her? She began her search with the small, worn-out file she had kept from her time in foster care. There, buried beneath pages of reports and letters, was the name of the hospital where she had been born. With a deep breath, Amara contacted the hospital, hoping that somehow someone would know something about her biological parents. To her surprise, she was given a small piece of information, a name, a faint memory from a nurse who had worked there during her birth. It wasn't much, but it was enough to spark a fire inside her. Unlike Elijah, Amara didn't have the luxury of a comfortable home or the resources to navigate the complicated world of adoption records and public offices. But she had something just as powerful: determination. She started making phone calls, visiting old records offices, tracking down any lead, no matter how small. Along the way, she encountered dead ends, and many people turned her away, too reluctant to speak about something that happened so long ago. Yet, Amara's resolve never wavered. She believed that her answers were out there, hidden just beyond her reach, and no obstacle could stop her. Eventually, after months of searching, Amara received a breakthrough. She found a contact who remembered her parents, someone who had known them before they vanished. This person offered a fragmented but valuable piece of information, a clue that led Amara to an old address. As she stood in front of the rundown building, heart racing, Amara felt a surge of emotions. Could this be the place where everything had started? Could this be the key to unlocking the mystery of why she was abandoned? On the other side of the country, Elijah had also found a clue. A small town, tucked away in the mountains, had surfaced in his research. It was here that his biological parents had last been seen. He packed a bag, gathered his courage, and set out on a journey to uncover the truth. He had no idea what awaited him at the end of this road, but the hunger for answers was more powerful than any fear. The possibility of finally understanding why his parents had left him behind pushed him forward. It was in this town that Elijah and Amara's paths would finally cross. Both unaware of the other's existence, both desperately searching for the truth about their origins, the twins were about to come face to face with the answers they had longed for. But even as their journeys were coming to a close, they still didn't know just how much their reunion would change everything. The quest for truth had taken them to unexpected places, but it was only the beginning of their incredible journey. Little did they know, the truth they were seeking was not the only thing they would uncover. The moment Elijah and Amara had both spent their entire lives searching for was finally upon them. After years of unanswered questions, painful longing, and countless hours of relentless searching, their paths were about to collide in the most unexpected way. Neither of them could have ever imagined what the truth would be, and neither of them could have anticipated the impact that their reunion would have on their lives. Their story, one filled with loss, abandonment, and pain, was about to take a turn that would forever change them, and the people around them. Elijah had arrived in the small town, heart racing as he walked down the quiet streets. The air felt thick with anticipation, as if the whole town were holding its breath, waiting for him to discover the answers he'd been searching for. It was a strange feeling, knowing that he was so close, yet still so far from the truth. The address he had found led him to a modest home on the edge of town, a home that seemed ordinary enough, except for the fact that it held the key to everything he had been looking for. The mystery of his biological parents was about to unfold, and Elijah's hands trembled as he reached for the doorbell. As he waited for someone to answer, Elijah couldn't help but wonder what kind of person his parents had been. Would they be like the loving family he had always dreamed of, or would they be different, perhaps cruel or indifferent, people who had cast him aside so easily? His heart beat faster as the door creaked open, and an elderly woman appeared on the threshold. The moment their eyes met, something shifted. Elijah felt an overwhelming sense of recognition, though he couldn't explain it. The woman studied him for a moment before speaking softly. "You must be Elijah." Her voice trembled slightly, and Elijah knew, without a doubt, that she knew exactly who he was. I've been looking for my parents," Elijah said, his voice shaking with a mix of hope and fear. "I think you know them. I need to know why they abandoned me." The woman's expression softened, and she stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. "Come in, dear," she said. "We have much to talk about." Inside, the conversation unfolded like a puzzle slowly coming together. The woman, whom Elijah learned was a distant relative of his biological parents, revealed shocking details about the twins' past. She spoke of a troubled marriage between Elijah and Amara's biological mother and father, of deep struggles that led to their tragic decision to abandon their children. But as Elijah listened, another truth emerged, one that would change everything he had believed about his past. Meanwhile, across the country, Amara stood outside an old weathered building, a sense of dread and anticipation weighing heavily on her chest. The address she had found led her to this place, a building that was once the home of her biological parents. She felt a strange pull toward it, as if some invisible force were guiding her, urging her to discover what lay inside. But the fear was overwhelming. What would she find? Was she ready to hear the truth? Taking a deep breath, Amara pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, filled with the scent of dust and old memories. A woman in her late 60s sat by the window, her face weathered with age but kind. When she looked up and saw Amara standing in the doorway, she gasped, her eyes widening in recognition. You're Amara," the woman said, her voice breaking as she stood up slowly. "I've been waiting for you." Amara's heart skipped a beat. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I do. I'm your grandmother." The revelation hit Amara like a tidal wave. For so many years, she had felt completely alone, abandoned by her parents, left to grow up in a world that had no place for her. And now, here she was, standing before someone who knew her, who had waited for her return. The truth began to unfold, and as the woman spoke, Amara learned about the heartbreaking circumstances that had led to her abandonment. Her parents, overwhelmed by personal demons and unable to care for two young children, had made the impossible decision to walk away. But what hurt Amara even more was the realization that her parents hadn't just abandoned her, they had abandoned Elijah too. As Amara listened to her grandmother's story, a flood of emotions overcame her. She was angry, hurt, and yet, a part of her also felt a sense of relief. The mystery was finally being unraveled, the truth about her parents and their struggles coming to light. But as her grandmother spoke of Elijah, a sudden realization struck her. Elijah had been searching for answers, just as she had, and he was so close to finding the truth. It wasn't until hours later, when Amara sat in a small cafe, processing everything she had just learned, that her phone rang. The name on the screen took her by surprise. Elijah. Her heart raced as she answered. "Amara." Elijah's voice was shaky but full of emotion. "I think I found something. Something big. We need to talk. I found the truth about our parents." The two of them spoke for hours, piecing together the fragments of their past and the overwhelming truth they had uncovered. And as they shared their stories, a profound realization hit them both. They were not alone anymore. The bond they had been searching for, the connection they had always known was there but couldn't explain, was real. They were siblings, and despite everything, despite the years of separation, the pain and the abandonment, they had finally found each other. The reunion wasn't what either of them had expected. It wasn't a perfect moment of joyful embrace. Instead, it was raw, emotional, and filled with mixed feelings of anger, hurt, and relief. But it was real. And in that moment, as they spoke to one another, They knew that no matter what had happened in the past, they would never be separated again. The final twist, however, came when they discovered the ultimate truth behind their parents' decision. It wasn't just about neglect. It was a choice born out of desperation and pain. Their parents had made mistakes, but they were not the villains they had been painted as. They, too, had been broken by life's cruel twists. Elijah and Amara realized that they could not change the past, but they could move forward together, stronger than ever before. Their journey had been long and painful, but it had led them to the most powerful realization of all. Family, no matter how broken or torn apart, could always be healed by love. And that was a truth that would never fade.